so we're moving on to our next session. So this is going to be really looking around, we talked in the morning around some of the actual kind of core primary kind of device management operating environments. And really actually now we're looking into that extended scenario in terms of how Microsoft are going to be supporting that and how this is really with that kind of natural affinity to the user identity. So for those of you at home, some of the audience here today have heard this a few times. Just as a quick way of introduction, my name's Phil Mercer, so I'm the Solutions Director at PowerON. So I always say I'm technical, but not the techie, but this is really where I have my partner in crime who's with us today.
Yeah, so I'm definitely the techie of the bunch. So my name's Steve Beaumont, I'm Product Development Director at PowerON Platforms. I'm also a Microsoft MVP for my sins, which means I work with the product groups and generally getting information out to the wider community around basically System Center and Cloud and Data Center management also, the Azure side and the on-premise management.
So in this session, we're going to be looking at the mobile management of the mobile device, but also a little bit into the MAM capabilities within Microsoft and also into the Azure AD Premium. These are both key feature or key components of the Microsoft Enterprise Mobility Suites that we've been kind of talking to today. But these are also ones that we do kind of pretty typically see as a logical starting point for a lot of customers. Certainly into the Azure AD, but also mobile device management, and that kind of unified deployment model is becoming very common across a large range of organizations. So, as we kind of really start to this is kind of talking to the fact that Azure AD is really kind of becoming now a very important and integral part, as identity always has, but really almost the kind of the overriding starting point for all kind of access. Certainly when we move into a more cloud-enabled world, when you actually need to be able to federate and interact with multiple different organizations, different types of kind of credentials and management, that kind of having one common identity with a simplified management and simplified security makes a massive difference. And the thing to think about with the Azure AD side is this is not saying that actually this common identity is not why I have my on-prem identity and I have my cloud identity. You are effectively having an extension of your AD in Azure. So it is the same size, you've got to obviously manage it as an extension to that, but it is not thinking of, well, I've got two ADs. I've got one AD, it's just spaced between cloud service.
Yeah. It's like having a domain controller across in primary data center and a domain controller across another one.
Yeah.
It's just different points in which to access and authenticate against. Just Azure AD brings in some other authentication mechanisms around things like SOAP and applications.
Yeah, absolutely. We see this actually with customers that are leveraging, say, they may have bought Office 365 and they're looking at SharePoint Online, but actually some are going, you know what, I want to actually deploy SharePoint as an infrastructure service in Azure, put a domain controller alongside that. So you've got that kind of access, different types of things. But we are seeing evolutions in this, and there's a lot of going into the identity platform within Microsoft around how it's actually interacting with business to business, business to consumer. So having kind of membership type sites, LinkedIn's going to potentially be a good one for them as they use LinkedIn credentials to support this. But the ability to say, well, actually, you can have your identity confirmed within an environment which allows you to authenticate into mine as long as that is an approved process. So, we're seeing this to the degree of maybe even having in the not so distant future AD or domain services as a service. So no longer you put an AD domain controller up there, you just subscribe to the actual AD domain services and have that same authentication management. Now, what that is really then kind of bringing in is a number of different bits and pieces as we kind of see across this. So that one common identity is leveraging then into some of the actual AD Premium side of how this kind of works. So within respect of the standard Azure AD, you do get a level of single sign-on for kind of standardized Microsoft applications. However, this then is expanded, and so you actually then go to the full range of cloud-enabled apps that Microsoft have already pre-done for you. So that's well in excess now of kind of the 2,500 type mark. But also the ability to actually leverage that same authentication. If it's an AD authenticated app, it's a pretty quick process to actually bring that into it. Or if it's not, you can use other authentication protocols, whether that be OAuth, SAML, other bits and pieces to create that credential and enable them to actually have easy connections to existing assets or really have a simplified user experience and have single sign-on as a quick setup within your business and get up and running quickly with respect to that.
That's the thing. The whole job for IT should always be about enabling users, not trying to block them and make it more difficult for them to work. One of my biggest reservations when we first started looking at Office 365 and using it internally as a business is I didn't want to get prompted again to retype my password in every time I wanted to access a resource.
Yeah.
I'm logged onto a PC, I just want to access it. And the same as we start to adopt more cloud services, we just want to be able to consume them, not consistently always get asked to re-authenticate who we are time and time again, and managing and juggling then multiple different identities.
Yeah, and we see this then expanding into that whole kind of management of everything, so the ability to have groups, have delegated management of groups to enable people to be brought in and out in terms of a structured manner, and how that then allows you to provision authentication sides and that business-to-business collaboration.
Yeah. Every time a team grows, you don't want to have to sit there as an administrative task, go in, add them in. Okay, so hey, you're part of sales, you're part of marketing and technology. You get these applications, you get granted access to this by the very nature of being a dynamic member of that group, so deciding what pitch and balance it needs to be on.
Absolutely. And then really kind of bringing this in terms of enabling to say, well, we've got that control, we've got to bring simplified tools in. Let's start to bring in more self-service. So, you know, the normal standard one that people
Bane of my life.
Password reset, right? So this is a couple of different ways that you can get this kind of put in. It is a very quick service to site. We're going to show this obviously to you as well in terms of how that. But the standard kind of Azure-based service is effectively a web portal. So as long as they have access to the internet, they can go through that. And then they are able to kind of expand upon that with some of the kind of capabilities for it. But very quick, again, group membership management, so individuals, managers can ensure they kind of go through that, as well as different types of elevated privileges. But this also introduces the concepts of my apps, so you can then assign people apps, or they can join or have access to apps based on different aspects around how they go through group membership. So simplifying again how users are able to kind of consume services within your business, but also giving them more of that self-serve capability to have a significant reduction in impact. So if you own EMS or the Enterprise Cloud Suite today, you can get password reset. So it is a quick service and something that is certainly kind of advised as a nice starting point. And really that kind of then brings elements together with then kind of protecting your users. So as well as having the ability to do single sign-on, password reset, you kind of close the kind of loop as well in terms of some of that typical credential log-on management. We're bringing in multi-factor authentication. So this is really, again, a very simple way of actually activating this for it. If you have a managed app within the Azure AD, you can effectively add pretty much the multi-factor authentication as a tick box exercise. And then it's effectively a soft token, most typically, so it either kind of calls you, emails you, texts you, and it has that ability then to say, you know, you must actually have something you own, something you know, something you have access to, and really then bringing that back in with kind of more reporting and security around how those credentials are managed. So you start to see that the Azure AD Premium brings a lot of expanded capabilities beyond this typical just I have a user profile, and really enables you then to start to add a lot of kind of extended management. Now this is the Azure AD. One of the grants that you do get by buying into Premium as well is you can go even further if you wish. There is more implementation time, because actually as part of the Azure AD Premium license grant, you also get a user access license for the Microsoft Identity Management Service, or actual product stack. It used to be called FIM, or Identity Lifecycle Manager. It is an on-premise deployment, but allows you to go much further in terms of your kind of user management and your kind of user profile across. If you have a very complex app estate, you want to have more security around exit and entry, around credentials and access into these things, you can go and actually install that kind of more advanced capabilities as well to sit alongside some of these things for particular scenarios. Now, if we then go into the next slide, so you know we're going to demo a few bits of those as we kind of go through. We start to see then the mobile device management. So we talked earlier around Windows 10 and Configuration Manager, talked more to do with the primary OS deployment, but Configuration Manager as a tool set for those that either have or have not necessarily got familiarity with it, is that kind of core primary systems management tool. So anything to do with how you're kind of managing applications, operating system deployments, patching, all that kind of good stuff is managed with Configuration Manager. But for your x86 or x86 type operating environments, and in terms of how you're kind of pushing that to say your traditional primary device or companion device, if we're talking time.
That's the thing, as workforces get more and more mobile, productivity, they need to be roaming, they're using phones and stuff. It's still a device, it still needs managing.
Yeah.
Might as well have one place to do it all.
Now what we have seen is we have seen a lot of customers that may have actually gone and bought a standalone mobile device management. So it was a big thing kind of several years ago, MDM, you've got to have it, it must be in place, good, kind of your different size of things around AirWatch and bits and pieces were kind of taking a lot of market share. Now what we have seen is as Intune has really kind of come alongside, but also that integration point. So we see here we've got 2 deployment models and we're just going to touch through, that actually the kind of the uptake has been significant over the last year. There are a lot of kind of resources and a lot of kind of improvements that have come through with this. But it does give you differing ways of how you can deploy it. So Intune can come through as a standalone service. So if you don't use config manager today, or you say maybe have an organization of a size or a particular remit where you have a very dedicated team to managing into your mobile device assets, then you can look and just deploy the Intune service. And I say deploy, it's pretty much consume, buy, and make sure you've got a user credential and you can be up and running. So anything around mobile devices and PCs to level, you can't do operating system deployment through the Intune standalone portal, but a very quick service that allows you to kind of get up and running in terms of how you work with that.
That's probably the biggest differentiation. Intune is a management tool, so configuration, settings, application deployment, whereas config manager is that full, robust OS deployment, end-to-end lifecycle management tool.
Absolutely. So really this is kind of bringing home around, are you wanting to look at, say, a part of your device estate, or, as we tend to refer to it, is extended to that full enterprise device management. And for really that's where we've seen a lot of customers, actually bring together the power of the configuration manager's tooling alongside Intune. So this, once you've got your Azure AD account, is a matter of setting up a connector, and the service is actually then supporting you through. So then actually, your primary devices, you'll still be typically managed through and will be managed through the system center, and then that whole mobile device extension is supported through the Intune service. But you are getting in a consistent experience, consistent management profile, and then mobile devices are just adding on as a deployment profile, as a type of device that is appearing within your kind of management arena in that respect. Now, we've certainly seen that actually that has kind of had probably most interest for a lot of customers where they've had, say, other MDM solutions, not necessarily named per se, but stuff where actually the challenge has been that overhead of managing differing kind of credentials. I've got to have separated accounts, it's got to necessarily have the same experience. And actually this just simplified model around working off an AD-based kind of management process, working off the consistent management experience you've got with Configuration Manager, it just makes a world of difference in terms of the practical day-to-day management for customers. And certainly, there's some good resources that we provided alongside this session where you'll see that actually Config, Intune, the EMS technology stack is very highly rated at pretty much kind of in the leaders quadrant across all 3 of the main disciplines that refer to this type of space within the kind of Gartner reviews. Just in terms of some basic kind of numbers and some bits and pieces, some of these numbers actually have slightly increased. Certainly in 2016 versions of the Configuration Manager, technically that scale has gone up. But what we see is, if you're looking at a relatively, say, smaller estate of PCs and MDM, if you're using it as a standalone to also manage into your PC estate, you can't really be looking above that kind of 5,000-6,000 user mark. Otherwise you can have issues with scalability. But if it is just pure mobiles, then there are reasonable kind of scale with the Intune service. But we would certainly typically advise, if you're a configuration manager user today, hybrid is a good solution. Some of the pullbacks that were previous with this was the release cycle, but as we've seen in the earlier sessions, now that actually the configuration manager has fallen in step with the actual kind of Microsoft Windows 10, we're seeing actually none of that kind of issues where I'm having to wait potentially for an Intune feature. It's getting delivered down to you alongside the current service branch. Now, in terms of this, how this is then managing for you, this is still thinking around your kind of typical comprehensive kind of lifecycle management. So within the Intune, within the MDM types of solutions, you still would work through that typical enrollment profile. The management side for Microsoft does support iOS. Android actually technically supports iOS better, and it supports its own Windows operating environment. So there are a couple of different kind of approaches to the enrollment depending on the operating environment you're working. You can have a native enrollment if you're on a Windows phone, or if it's an iOS, Android, there's effectively an app that you get brought down to your device and can kind of manage through with that. Now, the good thing though is helping you to kind of manage through this access is you can conditional access, so effectively you want to help drive those users to ensure that they're not accessing any corporate resources on non-managed devices. You can put that conditional access on and it will force the enrollment process for you. So helping you ensure that users are sticking to corporate policy. This will then actually kind of push down, provision all the different kind of services and access and different bits and pieces that you would expect across Wi-Fi's, email profiles, all the main sides, and can then push and deploy down those mandatory applications that you want to have, as well as leverage then app restrictions dependent on the profile of management. You've got a very granular control around what you can do with this device, turning off cameras, turning off different bits and pieces in terms of how that actually comes through, so depending on what kind of controls you want to put down. This brings through then in terms of managing protection, so this also can have those restrictions again around the way corporate data is effectively protected, the ability to start to put more application management sides within that, but also that differential between different types of data, and also ensuring that you've got that kind of reporting on device and application status. How far is this within my compliance or out of my compliance in terms of corporate standards?
That's one bit for me, is talking around that whole moving away from just purely saying, well fine, we've got to disable the camera on the phone, to actually, hang on a second, doesn't really matter, well it might still matter people taking photos of stuff they shouldn't, but actually if somebody pulls up a sensitive document, might be the R&D document with all the latest products that are going out there, and then they go and copy that data, paste it into their own private email, send it off to a competitor, that's data leakage on a managed device. So having that extra control now to wrap around at the application layer and say, well actually fine, I want to control it, I don't want work information going outside of the apps that we are managing as corporate applications, is a huge thing for me. It's that extra level of control.
Yeah, and it's interesting, we'll just see in a second as well around how that's kind of bringing through. But Microsoft have got a big focus within the MDM, the MAM side of this as well, because we're seeing that feature parity around mobile device is basically there. You're going to see this across a lot of the different capabilities in terms of these different technology stacks. And now a lot of the solutions are looking to differentiate themselves more in the MAM capabilities as they effectively do everything that you'd want from an MDM. So MDM type capabilities, to be honest, are primarily on a par for most devices. There are very maybe some explicit scenarios, but really I suppose we see the MDM kind of differentiate with Microsoft is that ability to have that hybrid deployment with the configuration management state. And of course, once you're actually in a position that you want to retire those devices for whatever reason, the user's left, the user device needs to be merged, you can then revoke access to that kind of corporate resources, ensuring that no longer can those devices have access, but also do selective wipes, audit lost and stolen devices, and all the kind of things you'd expect in terms of ensuring that, again, a retirement process matches your kind of corporate profile. Now, just touching on the MAM side as well, so this is
stealing your thunder.
No, sorry. This is something that Microsoft has a big focus on. So currently speaking, the MAM application, or the mobile application management side, is built into the Intune service as it stands. Now, this allows actually for a couple of key things that is kind of quite good with this. The ability to have multi-identity policy within the app. So the ability to intelligently understand that I might be using a Word app on my actual phone, but I actually may have personal documents that I'm interacting with on the Word, and I'm not necessarily so bothered about those. So that ability to have the differential between the personal and corporate data within the app rather than necessarily at kind of that higher level. So it gives you a much more granular control, ensuring that within a managed app you can have a lot of kind of security side there. And then bringing in what you'd expect in terms of the ability to drive kind of different types of capabilities that people can do, cut, copy, paste, save, different sides around how that interacts both within that app, but also within other apps within that kind of actual mobile device. Now, this is, as I say, as part of the Intune service, and typically speaking, let's say you're wanting to put that down, you may have to go through the process of switching MDMs. What we are actually starting to see from Microsoft is on the roadmap, and this isn't necessarily available right now, but it's certainly coming, is the ability to actually say create enlightened apps. So this may be a company app that you effectively kind of have as corporate credentials that's required to access, and then effectively is using the MAM service from Microsoft to protect that application. So that application can be loaded on any device, doesn't actually have to be within an MDM enrollment, or can even be in an alternative MDM enrollment, but is still secured and protected by your corporate policies. So we are starting to see Microsoft really kind of lead that kind of thought process around how we start to bring mobile application management in a way that actually leverages it not just for saying you must be a Microsoft user, because you may have a lot of kind of say external kind of partners working with you, but may need access to corporate apps. I want to control that corporate app access, but I can't give them a phone every single time, so they're going to use that off their personal device, which is already in their mobile app device management kind of management profile. So some really cool stuff coming through from Microsoft in terms of the whole MAM side of things, but it is really around giving that granularity of control, but also a lot of flexibility of choice as well in terms of how we see this come through. So rather than do a lot more talking, it's obviously always nicer to see this stuff. So we're going to kind of run through a bit of a demo in terms of starting to show us through some of these kind of capabilities, starting really with looking at the identity platform from Microsoft within the Azure space, so looking around some of those bits that we talked about, and then kind of just touching as well on how the MDM and MAM type of policies and settings work within the service. So I'll hand over to Steve at this point.
Would do if my mouse worked. There we go. Right. So one of the first things I want to do is just introduce you very quickly to the actual Azure AD Portal. So this is a lot of customers might already have this. It's not necessarily something that is just purely an Azure service. So if you have any form of Office 365 subscription, etc., you probably have this under the covers, but you might not necessarily have seen this page. So the contents that you see in here, you can do some of it within the actual Office 365 portal. So user management, etc. is done through there usually, whereas this is more of that back-end view of it. Now, along with lots of bits and pieces in here, Phil mentioned earlier around things like the report side, so I get to see the types of logins we're getting, if we do have any leaked credentials, how we're actually not performing as such, but things like how much applications are getting used. We get this kind of heads-up view to actually see just exactly what's going on within the systems. Now, like I said, I have this currently synchronized. This is not just purely a pure cloud directory. This is a mixture of some of our external partners, customers, but is synchronized with our local Active Directory in terms of some of the users that are actually within the system. Now, we also have in more the advanced deployment, rather than just synchronizing up identities, and we actually have Active Directory Federation services in play as well, which means the actual authentication of these accounts are done against our local on-premises Active Directory servers. And one of the things that's within the new portal specifically around this is actually being able to have that idea and that view of what the health of our ADFS infrastructure looks like. You can see there's a slight warning with our directory sync at the minute, but it gives us a very quick and easy heads up just to how healthy our system is, how well it's working, when it was last synchronized, and what's going on within the service. So it's taking them identities out of our Active Directory, pushing them across and into our cloud Azure AD service. So when I drill down into it, I can see various things around that user, the information that's synchronized across from our local Active Directory, which allows our users to sign in and access some of our different infrastructure services that we offer out from the external users when they're not internally within our organization. Now, in saying that, if one of our users, like myself today, so if I can bring up a new in private window, if I try to access something like the Office portal, so if I go to Office or portal.office my apps, it would ask me for a login. So this is where I was saying earlier about that whole single sign-on. Because I am currently sat outside of our offices and I'm on just a public internet connection, it's going to want to actually make sure that I am who I say I am. So if I go to sign on, as soon as I press tab, it should go, hang on a second, you're not just purely Azure AD authenticated, you are internally authenticating against your servers, so it's redirected me back to my on-premise authentication. So I try to authenticate and then it lets me in. So I can sign in when I'm external to our network but using my domain credentials. However, if I cheat and pretend that I'm actually in the office, so if I go and use an Azure, not an Azure remote app, just a normal remote app, so this is actually accessing, this is on a server that is back internally within my network, and I try to go to that same address, so portal.office.com/myapps. Then it decides it doesn't want to do it. So it should have just signed me straight in using my logged in credentials. Now, what I have specifically done to make single sign-in easier is on the admin side, I can specify IP ranges where I want to allow single sign-on, where I don't want to allow it, and also where I want certain services such as multi-factor authentication to be specifically applied. So very quickly talk about MFA and some of the password reset side and just on the security aspects. If I close that bit again. If I go back to here. So if I'm looking more at the actual account side, this is where I can choose to do things like enable multi-factor authentications for my users. So if I go find my account, I disabled multi-factor authentication earlier, so you can see this is currently disabled. If I leave this disabled for a second and then I'll come back and enable it, if I was to do something like try to reset my password, so if I go again to something like the My Apps page, type in my credentials again, and I go, actually, hang on a second, I've actually forgotten what my local password is. So I've forgotten what my AD credentials are, I'm outside of the office, I have a very easy way to then decide, well, actually, I want to reset that password. So who am I? Just double checking that we've not accidentally clicked the link, for example. Here we go. I've got to give it an initial verification to make sure that we're not just a robot that's trying to go and spam out some of the bits. I think that's the right code. So one of the first things that's going to happen, if I get this ready, let's not just tell the entire world my password. Get back to that. So if I want to get back into my account, it says I've totally forgotten my password, I can't remember it at all, so I need to completely reset it. Now bear in mind, I have not currently got multi-factor authentication enabled, but by very nature of when I signed up to allow password reset, so I had to do a register phase, there's a number of different scenarios I could have had. I could have had alternative email, I could have mobile phone authentication, so actually something that I have, or a series of questions. So I could have said, what's my favourite colour, what's my cat's phone number, my cat's name. However, I'm going to use this for an example. When I go to call it, then we should see any second. I've got very limited signal here, so this may or may not come through. Not looking good for signal wise at the minute. It's usually where I wave my phone around in the air to get signal. That's not going to come through, is it? Nope, and I've lost signal altogether. But that would call my phone, and it'd have a very simple thing. You get a message from Microsoft saying, oh, you're asked to reset your password, just need to authenticate you, press star to hash to continue, press it, and it would take me on to the next step because I've gone past the verification step and I can basically reset my password. And by the very nature that we have that communication with our on-premise Active Directory, with the whole AD Connect, it will then synchronize that password back to my local on-premise with password right back enabled. Now I could decide actually, rather than just something simply where it's an ad hoc case of when I registered for my password reset, that it's just simply using my phone, I could decide, well actually my account is fairly privileged really I should have enabled multi-factor authentication every time that I'm going to authenticate to the service. So now if I try to sign on to my portal, it will actually ring or text me to verify that I am there, that I am who I say I am, before I can get access to that service. So again, something that was very, very easy to enable. If a user's not currently registered, the first time they go to access the portal after enabling it, it will ask them to go through a registration phase, make sure that they've got phone numbers entered into the profile so that it can be utilised, and then it becomes active. Now we do have some certain things that we can use to actually make sure this isn't such a nag for users. Little things like when I'm on my internal IP ranges, do not ask me for multi-factor authentication. If I'm sat physically in my building, I'm pretty much going to say that I am trusted, that I am who I say I am. Otherwise, we're going to go through things like actually, I might want to use a mobile app on my phone. So we have the mobile app authentication. It's like that soft token that you mentioned earlier, Phil. Or we can also say, well, actually, hang on a second. If I authenticate, then don't remind me again for another 7 days, or actually maybe 14 days. If it goes over that, or I have a few incorrect logins, then re-ask me to authenticate. It's all about not trying to put this to get into the way of users. We just want to be able to do it to provide an extra level of security for when we are out and about. So we've got some users in here now. We can have several different users. We've got the idea around groups that Phil was mentioning. So this ability to have either the groups that are sourced from my local Active Directory, or we start to build up things around the different types of groups, or we can start to use the new Office 365 ones, make them a bit more dynamic, so based on properties that could again be synced from local Active Directory. And all this kind of builds up into this application side. So we've got an authentication mechanism, we've got something that we can assign stuff to with groups, control access rather than individual users. And then we can actually start to enable the types of services that we offer out to our users. So this can come in the form of about 3 different things. We either might have an on-premise application that we're developing, so I want to go really in depth, start to look at the APIs that are on offer, build in things like SOAP and different ticketing authorization mechanisms into my application. We have a gallery, and we have published from an internal application that we need to access externally. So the application stuff is basically an ever-growing list. So I think this was about 2,500 last time I looked. So we're creeping up daily. But it might be a case of we have something that we use at a business layer. Some of this stuff you might not even be aware that you use at a business layer. Your end users might be using things like Twitter, Facebook, Dropbox, Salesforce, all types of different cloud-based applications that they have their own set of applications or credentials for, either within the application or just a registered email address, might be just accessing using their Facebook credentials. Or even worse is they might be typing in their business email and their current password and passing that across to another provider that you might not necessarily want them keeping it in sync with. At least this way I can browse through, I can see the different ones that I have available. And for example, if I went and looked for something like Twitter, so say it was your marketing team that are using Twitter to send out messages. Seem to be picking on marketing a bit nowadays. Yes, we want to have this as Twitter. And then we click OK. There's not a lot more decision basis around other than finding the application. Now, this isn't going to add it because I already have Twitter in here. Yeah, going to add it. So if I go and find my Twitter application, glad your eyes are working. And then we are able then to say, well, actually, we can control now who actually has access to Twitter. So we might have a corporate Twitter account, which I'll show you in a minute how this actually works. We can say, well, actually, fine. Show me all the users. Maybe I want to say, well, fine, today we're going to actually give access to, where's my search button? Kimberly. Right, well, actually, Kimberly's not got access at the minute to Twitter. I don't want to give her the username and password for our corporate Twitter account. Mainly because if she left, she'd either still have access to it. Hopefully I'd go through and say, well fine, she's left, she had access to Twitter, she had the username and password, I'll reset the account and tell everyone else that's still there what the new password is, which then means I go through that same rigmarole next time somebody leaves. Or I could say, well actually now I want to assign Kimberly access to the Twitter account, and then when they log on to the portal, it would actually appear within their application. So alongside all my Office 365 bits, I also now have Twitter. Now, I'm currently signed in to my Twitter account. Feel free to obviously follow me, by the way, at StevieBSE. If I sign out of my Twitter account, now rather than having to go and say log in, we'll find what is my username and password for our corporate one. If I try to sign in using the app that's been assigned to me, probably should have closed the tab, is automatically populated them details. The end user doesn't need to know them details. They can still log into it, they can still post tweets at it. However, when that user leaves, it's now as simple as revoking access to that application. Excuse me. It's now as simple as revoking access to the application or disable their corporate ID, and then they can no longer access the Twitter application. It means it's a level of security for the business. It's providing access as we would do with Active Directory groups and services. If you're in there, if you have an account, you can access. If not, you can't access. It's as simple as that, without giving out credentials all the time. Similarly, if I go back another level again, I might decide that actually we have an application that's currently inside of our internal network. So for example, I have a website that I want people externally to be able to access. So maybe we'll call this the IT SelfService Portal. Now it's as simple as actually saying, well this one already exists, so we can see how that's configured in a minute. So if I can simply specify what the URL is that we expect users to be able to access internally, so IT Service Desk, IT Service Desk, should I say? So we can see that this already exists, so I've got this set up already. But if I want to simply say, well actually, if you've logged in with Azure Active Directory, then just use that same set of credentials to come back into our network and access internal resource, but regardless of where you are in terms of internet access basically, then we have a secure method of actually publishing out applications. So it's what we call reverse proxy. So we have a very small agent that's sat on a server, and we're basically using that as an SSL tunnel for access in and out of our network to applications. So we can see that we have IT self-service somewhere. Probably should have filtered it that side. So we have this application proxy, so that's installed and enabled on the server in our network. We've got the connectivity going. We've assigned some accounts to it, so we can see who's currently using this application. So we've got user based at the minute rather than groups. So we've got a few users that are using this, or should we say just assigned users. Anyway, we've got some users that are assigned to it, and then the basic configuration settings is there is an external URL and an internal URL, and how we're going to access it. And again, it's assigned and enabled. I don't think anyone's stopped publishing it to me. So I should have IT Self-Service Portal within my application. So again, consistent place for users to go to. If they're currently external outside of the office, they can log on to the Office 365 portal or the My Apps, and there's actually a My Apps URL as well, just to get to this bit. But when I try to access that application, redirected it. Who are you? I've enabled multi-factor authentication, which might be fun. So a good example, I've got all my things, yes, phone me, So actually I've got a tiny bit more signal at the minute. So this is killing 2 demos with 1 bird since the other one didn't answer earlier. He says. Oh, I've got quiet hours on. And I've just done another missed call. Let me try going back and back in again. Contact me. So quiet hours is a brilliant feature for making sure that nobody bothers to call you. Might be stuck in the loop because I've literally just gone backwards and forwards. Another verification attempt is in progress. It's probably busy talking to my voicemail. Talking to my voicemail, what did I say? There we go. So I can answer it.
Using Microsoft sign-in verification system, you press the hash key to finish your verification. If you did not initiate this verification, your sign-in was successfully verified.
You can see in the background, signing me in. Good, take me to the next step, please. Take me to the next step, come on. Is that now set up or not? Don't ask me again for 14 days. Answer. There we go, so it's verified. So ask me for some corporate credentials. And that should take me through to my self-service portal, where I can then actually get access to, this is an internal application running inside of our network that I'm just accessing from an internet connection, but making sure that I've been verified, I am who I say I am, and then I can just access and use this regardless and carry on. So, gone through some various bits and pieces. There's the whole syncing of the users up into Azure. There's common credential capabilities now. It doesn't matter if I'm working on-premises or up in the cloud base with just an internet connection. Doesn't matter whether I'm accessing a cloud-based application, something like Twitter, or it could be something where I actually have that full single sign-on and that application account sharing. So something like Concur, where they use the same application sets regardless. We've got protection at the security level, so making sure we've got multi-factor authentication for different users. We've got health checks on it. We've got the reporting capability. Just have a quick look at reports. So I haven't checked this in the last few days, so hopefully they're not going to see that anyone's got any leaked credentials within our environment. Users with leaked credentials, this should all be nice and healthy. Watch it have 5 different users that I need to go running around after now. So this is making sure, this is all about that idea of, again, Microsoft, the work they do within the, their cybersecurity side. If they're seeing different user credentials pop up on dark webs with different forms for sale, they can flag them up, they can check it against their list of people that have Azure AD services, and they can actually proactively tell you, hang on a second, one of your users used this email address, this credential, on an online forum. We're not saying that it's the same password, it might be, but you want to be aware that this entity was in a database that was compromised, and you might just want to prompt your users to reset their passwords. And then, as Phil was just mentioning a second ago, that whole idea of, hang on a second, what applications are users using? Is anyone actively uploading stuff to Dropbox? Well, one of the things that we have within the new Azure portal, oops, just hidden off the screen, is this AD App Discovery. So this gives you a very little agent that you can download, deploy out to your PCs, and then it'll actively start looking at what different cloud-based applications users are actually what they are going out and using. Now, when my internet speed catches up today, we can see there's various different applications, and we have this different line between managed and unmanaged applications. So managed are the ones that we have proactively added user accounts into. We are assigning access via the Office 365 portal. So that's applications like this and the Twitters, the YouTubes of the world, ones that people are going and accessing that we have assigned access to. And then we have the unmanaged ones. And this data set can pull back an awful lot of information regarding things like what the actual application people are using, how many people are accessing it, what type of data volumes, and even individual files. How much are we pushing up and down to these different cloud-based applications? So see, we've got traffic from DocuSign, GitHub, so we've got users that are actually going and putting a lot of information into our source control, along with TeamViewer. So it gives us information that we can start to look at regarding which ones we currently have as managed apps and which ones aren't managed. So something like GitHub, we might decide, well, actually, we don't want to continue to use individual non-managed applications anymore. We want to start to take control of that, and now we'll assign access and create users with our corporate IDs and credentials inside the application, but from an IT managed perspective. So, last couple of things to really quickly show is around the mobile device management. So, if we have a look in Configuration Manager, so we use Remote App. So, my phone is currently enrolled as a managed device. So, if I have a look at all settings, see under Accounts, Access Work or School. Not that. Go back. So I'm on the latest Insider build and it's no longer where I thought it was going to be. So I have my phone enrolled in Workplace Join, which means I have access to things like my company portal. So this is now a managed device for us. When this logs into the portal for us, again, we're using our standard Active Directory AD accounts. So this is asking us to do the initial bit of sign in. So if I go to sign in, now I have no signal, so I'm not going to get signed in. Multifactor authentication. And as quick as it is to enable it, it's also as quick to disable it. So if I go to sign in, let's not show it again. signing in minus multi-factor authentication now. So we have the ability to actually see the different types of devices we've got enrolled. If I've got multiple devices, be them tablets or phones or PCs, we've got contact details for support, and we have the applications as well. Now I only have a couple of applications that are currently published. These are just a couple of test ones. Shapes being something where we actually have the application itself, so we have the ability to actually do the actual install directly, rather than having to go to the store. But from a config manager, let's see, it's currently pending sync. From a config manager perspective, it does mean that we have a mixture of mobile devices and laptops and servers within our environment now. So we have devices that are either just purely connected to Office 365 as ActiveSync clients. We have managed devices, and it looks like Harry's been doing a bit of testing recently. Different iPads, iPhones, as well as some other things like my phone. When I go and find my phone, and there's my phone, and my different devices I'm doing. So they actually now coexist inside along with all the other devices that we manage, just as a managed device. But we can do all the things that we'd expect to do with mobile devices. Maybe I want to change my passcode because I showed it on screen from a PIN number. Maybe I want to lock it. Maybe I want to wipe it entirely and actually retire it out of our estate because I've either lost it. But we do have policies that we can push down to these. So all the control that we have in terms of turning off things like cameras, so we might decide that we want to disable cameras, iOS or Windows phones. Bluetooth might be disabled. We need to enforce different lengths of passwords. We can actually build up all the individual item settings that we want to push out alongside resource access to things like maybe we want to push out the Wi-Fi policies for the different areas of the business, or what's our actual corporate email configuration. So we can actually build up an entire package of how we want them phones to be configured and roll it out to the end users when they're enrolled into the different system, along with deciding the types of applications that might be either on-premise, PC style applications, or mobile applications that exist in things like the Windows Store or the iOS stores or even the Android stores. So we can actually pull applications that we either have the files for or applications that are in the public stores that we want to push out to. And then finally, as we mentioned, this whole MAM side, we actually define out the actual applications when they can be application managed down to that deep level. What do we want to do? Well, maybe we want to prevent backing up to iTunes. We don't want the copy and paste. So we define out our policies and then we apply them to the individual applications as we deploy them out.
So hopefully that's going to give you a bit of a showcase into the way that these kind of different devices would work. So obviously into the Azure AD, some really powerful capabilities that you have there, and kind of just really a snippet view into the kind of the mobile device and mobile application management. You can see actually the configuration of these things once you're up and running is a fairly logical process, and it's going to be quite quick to do, especially when you're leveraging into some of the kind of the password, multi-factor, single sign-on, all that kind of great stuff. So hopefully that's been very useful for you. Again, there will be resources and kind of copies of this provided for you in post, but certainly do kind of ask any questions, and thank you very much for your time.